everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on startup village. Emerging economy like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Nepal. Everyone has a lot of villages. So, World Talent Economy Forum, we are providing training to our grassroots level people to develop startup. We develop people as an entrepreneurs. So definitely today's session is very, very important, and we want to do a startup related series because we have around 1,500 entrepreneurs who can learn from today's session. We have our world famous entrepreneurs, Mr. Eric and Professor David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Eric.
Hi. So, what is the number one problem with startup companies is lack of resources usually. And one of those big resources, just skills and knowledge. You have a few people and everybody can't know anything. You have to be able to build the organization. And that includes things like cultures and legal and processes and IT and communications. You also have to be able to build the customers. That includes both sales and marketing. And you have to be able to build the products. And that includes things like engineering and delivery and support. Nobody can know all that. So the first problem is you might have 1 to 5 people, could be more, but usually it's small groups who have a limited skill set. The other thing is just the rest of the resources, which is money, contacts, things like that. So how do you go about making sure that small groups of people have all that? Some people focus on education. So, like, for example, I went through Startup Leadership Program, and they focus on, what's a term sheet? What is lean entrepreneurship? How do you pick a team? And, it's kind of an intensive course where they give you exercises. And so education is a good thing. The other thing is you get mentorships. And of course, in mentorships, you have somebody who's been through some of the process who can go with it. And so typically besides these programs, which start with education, then they have programs with education and coaches, then they have more immersive environments where you connect with people. And one of the big things in connecting with people is networking. Networking with people that have more knowledge is good, but just networking people like yourself, because the opportunity to give up is pretty easy. It's pretty common. I met one startup founder who's doing very well. The company went great, and he told me that I must be doing really good because I only feel like quitting once a day now. So, and a lot of people, you feel like quitting up to the moment where things start happening, even sometimes even a week before people want to quit. So just connecting with people like yourself that can give you the encouragement. And so that group, getting groups of people. So what if you could put all those things in one hat? You could put in education, mentorship, networking and support, and resources, sometimes including funding. So how do you do that? Well, you can do that in the village concept. You can do that in an incubator or an accelerator. So accelerators tend to say, here's a program, let's get everybody, in this group, and we'll get you through together. The other one is more of an incubator, which has different people going through at different times, but having that full access to resources, having vehicles for exposure. The startup I was in, we joined one of those groups where they used to bring in companies looking for technology every week, and different things. They had different groups. They had like hospitality and biotech and, different groups. And then they would bring people looking for that. So that is basically how we got hooked up and eventually signed an agreement with Panasonic, was that Panasonic came to this part that we got accepted in. We actually won a contest to get and got accepted that. So we had a little office in this space, and went to one of those things and met Panasonic. So community is important, collaboration, networking, mentorship, resources. And so that's some of the idea, but there's something that's kind of important there. We have a well-known program and organization where I live in San Diego, and it's effective, and people go through, and they eventually combined with a bunch of venture capital organization in there. So even the funding piece, the knowledge piece, the knowledge of where everybody is, but here's the thing, that was located in a fairly well-off area. And while their program was really good, they tried to move it to 2 other areas, and it found out they had to change the program, because you have to go with where your people are. And the first thing you have to ask yourself is, can I do this? Does this work? But would it work for me? And in some of the areas, nobody'd been exposed to this stuff, and they said, this won't work. Nobody, we've never seen this. This doesn't work. So they had to add a whole extra program on there just to convince people that this, in fact, does work. And then the bigger part was that it would work for them. It could work for them. You could do this. It's possible. So people come with different skill sets. On the other hand, they were very aware of, you got to do hard work. This is how it goes. You got to take risks. They were more, so in some places, this one neighborhood had less skills in some areas and more skills in other. And the other place, same thing, had the opposite skills. They were already, I can do this. This is it. Oh, but I don't know how to do this kind of stuff. And so you really have to, tailor your program to where your people are. Like we started a Blue Tech, which is ocean and freshwater, saltwater technologies here in San Diego. And the organization that I helped start, that was part of it. And there was a little bit of different culture things that we had to do. On the other hand, there's another accelerator in Nova Scotia, which is different too. And I've seen some in other countries that require different kind of curriculums and in different orders based on where people at, where there are mindsets. Like in some countries in Africa, the people are so hardworking, you don't have to teach them that. But other things, when it comes with these connections, they're not used to these enterprises of saying, no, we need to hook you up with these providers in this way. And it's a kind of an unknown quantity from where, because they don't have that where they are. And these startups are not only in these big high-tech things like that. And I use Alibaba as an example. So Alibaba is kind of analogous to Amazon, except it's more of the customer folks, and there are whole villages that start up that are these Alibaba villages, which are starting jobs in a village that are from the start meant to be internet based. That's different than saying, here's a company that's learned to use the internet. These are internet companies that can be run in developing areas and all over the place. And so they start these Alibaba villages to get a whole group of people as successful business owners by starting businesses designed from the start to be an internet business and still bring income into developing countries. So the whole idea, though, is getting people what they need the right way, a wide range of skills, being able to plug into other people that have skills you don't, mentorship, resources, and the ability to get exposure is a big thing with that. So I've helped and been part of several incubators and accelerators And there's different philosophies on how to make them work, but probably the biggest thing I enjoy most of that is just the community building that goes on, and it's a different mindset. When I was in the corporate world, if you came up with a new idea, people would jump on you immediately and tell you why that idea wouldn't work. And within the communities, within these villages, the first question they asked wouldn't tell you why this won't work. They would ask a question, how are you going to test that? Nobody said, oh, that's a stupid idea, it'll never work. They said, interesting, how would you test that to see if it worked? So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Eric, thank you.
Mr. David is speaking.
Well, Dr. Sharif, Eric, thank you so much. I agree with 99% what you said, Eric. My only difference is I see more nuances in some of the descriptions there, particularly when you talk about incubators. But I want to, first of all, agree with you that the Connect program at University of California, San Diego, that Mary Warshak runs there, is one of the best programs I've seen in a geographic region. Connect is just a fantastic program. And I actually was involved with her and Annette Gentleman, Richard Seeline, trying to expand that into a couple of other regions. And you are right, it didn't work at all outside of the unique ecosystem that you had in San Diego with all the research institutions and everything around it. It does create a more of a unique environment. But I would like to jump in a little bit different level. Incubators are not my favorite form. Most incubators are established for economic development or for licensing income to universities and things. And Eric, I'm much more cruel than you are about incubators. I think just like you have incubators in hospital where you put sick kids as they're trying to be born, I think business incubators are where you put sick business ideas as they're trying to be born to try to nurse them back to health. Where I think accelerators, the villages, I think the startup ecosystems are much better ways to go. I have spoken at the National Business Incubator Associations several times, and what strikes me is about half the people there are actually from universities or from county government saying, can I do a real estate play? Can I use an incubator to rent real estate out? And it's less concerned with the company growing than it is monetizing those. So as you look at startups, you have to be very careful of that. Now, on the other hand, I was on the board of one of the very first incubators started in the United States, a long time ago, called the Austin Technology Incubator, which is still going and flourishing today and has been the model for many others. And some of the people from there, for example, Laura Kilcrease is running the Innovate program for one of the whole groups in Canada that is just producing tremendous results. It's Innovate Alberta, just tremendous results from their program because it's more like what Eric's describing, what I would describe. It's how do you provide a ecosystem that can support you, that understand and can do. I'm multiple of those around the country who are going and training, help mentor a company. In Austin, I'm not only a mentor at the International Accelerator, I'm on their investment committee. And we review every month 50, 60 applications for international companies to come to the International Accelerator here and to be exposed to the environment. What we do here, Eric, is even beyond some of what you were talking about. If there are, for example, conferences in Austin, like the InnoTech conference that I spoke at a few weeks ago, or a South by Southwest, or a trade expo from another country coming. We'll take the companies that are in the International Accelerator to those events and have them there. We actually take them to the cultural events too. For example, last summer, we took all of the companies from the accelerator, a bunch of business leaders, and we went out to Lake Travis and had a day cooking hamburgers, swimming in the lake and stuff, to help them understand in a non-formal setting how to work with others. And you've got to kind of do both of those. The other thing is, and this is a harder one, most incubators, most accelerators, even the large scale accelerators like Mass Challenge, Entrepreneurs, and others, they are focused on the broader notion of how many companies can I deal flow through them. And you'll see that happen. So you have to be selective. You need to match the type of group that is helping you with, number one, the market you're in. A lot of the different type of accelerator, incubators, startup villages, whatever you want to call them, have niches they're in. If you're starting up a company in pharmaceuticals, you don't want to go into an accelerator like the National Manufacturing Accelerator that manufactures stuff. It's just not a good mix. Also, most of these should help you procure funding. Many do not. So if you need help with funding, again, you need to look at that type of organization to work with you to do it. I can tell you, one of the startup companies that I worked with as I've gone through Europe, I do work time to time with a group that focuses on cross-border, cross-ocean startups, funding, and M&As. And I've done a lot of training on startups in Europe and in South America. And the cultures are so different. In Europe, I can use EU funding, and I can develop products without ever having to go and procure any startup money by using EU funds as a grant. I can't do that here. You can use Small Business Administration grants in the United States, but the rules are so very different. And what property rights can you get? You know, if I'm in other parts of the world, if I'm in Africa, if I'm in South America, if I'm in parts of Asia, not all of Asia, I can go and use International Development Bank funds. I can use World Bank funds. I can use USAID funds as part of the way to fund my startups. And so you really have to look on the funding side in your environment where you can take advantage. There's always the old concept of friends, family, and fools. And those are where most startups get their initial funding, is going out to people. Then you begin to go after it. You begin to look at wealthy private investors. You look at venture capitalists. You look at PE funds. One of them that's often overlooking, which I love to talk to startups about, is the venturing arms of corporations. For example, if you go into Qualcomm, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, many companies like that, they have internal venture capital arms internally. It's not true venture capital, but they want to find companies that either plug holes in what they're offering as a skill, service, product that they need, and then they will fund you. But what they do that's even better, they will take their team to work with you. They will take their products that they want you to work with and give you those products to work with. And they will give you that first market, those first products, which for any startup, getting to a minimal viable product, an MVP, and beginning to get initial revenue is the biggest milestone that most startups need. That is when you're going to attract more capital. That's when you're going to attract a better source of human capital for your company, is once you hit that revenue window. And a lot of entrepreneurs kind of forget that. They like getting up to there and then moving it forward. And that's why technology transfer startups are so interesting, because it takes multiple personality types for the leaders, for the startups, to go through the different stages of a startup. I did one startup personally where we had a great team. One of the guys, full of energy, very dynamic startup guy. But once we started negotiating contracts with big companies, having to become very bureaucratic, going through those details, and having to spend a lot of time with lawyers, contracts, intellectual property, doing patent disclosures and all that, he felt so far out of place, he actually committed suicide, because it's a very different approach as you go through different stages of the startup journey, from the initial, I've got an idea, to, okay, I'm a full-fledged company now, I'm in revenue, and I'm ready to launch and move on to the next phase, and maybe start my second product, my third product, my fourth product. All of those very deep, and it takes the team. What I like about the term the startup village is it goes against the adage that it does take a whole village to be successful in teaching someone. And startups surely fit into that approach and methodology. And particularly as you go through the different stages of it, and how we can do that. Final couple of thoughts on this initial one. Pitch competitions. I love pitch competitions. I like them as a startup, but they are not without their own challenges. I've been judges at numerous pitch contests all around the world. And what happens sometimes is the entrepreneur who's pitching gives away way too much information. And on one hand, you go, gee, I don't want to fund them because they're not protecting their intellectual property. And I've actually seen intellectual property stolen at pitch competitions because it was freely given in a public venue without any type of non-disclosure. And so you see that, but pitch competitions is a very good way to see yourself vis-a-vis your competitors with the other people in your region, to get exposure. But as in many things, you have to be careful. You have to be very careful to pitch. It's a delicate balance between giving enough so that people can know what you're doing, and oversharing so people can duplicate what you're doing, or that they feel you do not understand business well enough. Another company that I work with, the founder, the CEO, is a true visionary, but do not let him pitch the company. Don't put him in front of any audience with a pitch deck. Don't let him get in and try to run development, because none of those will come out in a good way, because their strengths, their personality is not in that. So sometimes the founder could be one of the worst persons to pitch you, or to go find funding, or to run development. You really have to go and assess, what do you do well, what do you not do well in a startup. And even though you don't have a lot of resources, that is something I've seen kill more startups than I've seen anything else, is that you have leadership who tries to do something they cannot do, or who feels they can do it, and it runs people away, it runs investment away and things. So Sharif, as you can see, it's a great topic, and one I'm very passionate about, but there's many nuances to it. And Eric, I agree with what you said, with the exception of pure incubators, because to me, that definition is so loaded that it's hard to know which type you're getting into, because all incubators are not created equal. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Yeah, and I just use that whole ecosystem of incubators, accelerators, educate. That whole thing is there's a whole packet of stuff. Some can destroy you, some can help you. You have to watch out. The biggest problem you have is going that you don't really understand that ecosystem. You get attached to one, and then it's like, so where am I? What am I doing? I think one of the biggest things, for example, watching, helping grow San Diego's, startup ecosystem. It used to be a bunch of people unconnected, where the Bay Area in San Francisco was very well connected. 2 minutes, they could hook you up. Oh, I need somebody who knows this or does this. You'd be having a coffee with them, 2 hours later that day, and maybe they offered you a lot of noise there, though. That a lot of it was not real. San Diego was pretty disconnected, so it's a good lesson in community building. So, one of the organizations that started was from a guy who came from the Bay Area and said, "Boy, where's the community and culture that I'm used to here?" And he just started meeting people for coffee, and then it turned into groups that are still there today. I host one of those groups, and it's that kind of, but it became that kind of entry level for somebody going, I don't know about startups, or I've got a startup. How do I get that phase of picking what lane I want to be in? And it got very good of knowing people who know people to say, oh, you should talk over at UCSD to this instructor, this group of people doing that. And it became that people. And the startup week grew from, I think our first one was 60. And right before COVID, I think startup week was 3,000 people showing it, and from all over the world, people coming in. And then the organization you talked about, Connect, that was one of the first attempts to get all these organizations in one bucket. And the thing about Connect is it actually has their springboard. So they went for that early stage, but then they also merged with San Diego Venture Group, which is the money. And then they also connected with the other places like Evo Nexus, which, hooked up with game developers and Qualcomm. And so, people coming in looking for technology. So there's that push of, I've got my solution or my thing, help expose me. And then there's the other side you talked about, which was the pull, saying we're looking for people who can help with that numerical processing for, machine to machine learning, AI. So there's this idea of push and pull, but this community kind of came by people getting started. A lot of those came from even the co-working. So here's a place where people are just working together who want to start stuff. And they started adding these functions on top of that. Give an example of Hera Hub, which is kind of a woman-focused place. And of course, women have challenges with funding and things like that. So they started the mentor program. So they basically started providing some of those co-working. And then they started Hera Angels, which is the money. So that's a co-working place that came from that and worked up. Then you have the other people working down and saying, well, where is our fear system? Where do we find and get our people? The other topic. So yeah, I agree with you that there's flaws in just education only. There's flaws in, one of the problems with these incubators, accelerators, is that they're just looking for people who can make money quickly. And they're constantly saying, all right, you've got this much time, you're out, you didn't do it. So there's a very big push to have to deliver. Some ideas take a long time. Some things are different. And by the way, it was Connect that tried to start in the poor neighborhoods, which was successful because they listened. The first attempt failed. So they went in and changed their program to one that was successful because they had to adjust. But yeah, Connect has all those functions feeding into it. So to me, that's the real key of how do you go from this idea of coming up with an idea, finding resources, to getting what you need and getting exposure. So it's but I guess what I'm saying, one of the biggest things was an intention to provide an environment across the community that did that, to hook up the universities with the companies, with the incubators and accelerators and educators, to actually, and then go into all the co-working. So we even had the independent co-working places working together to provide that, not just a community in one co-working, but with other ones. So, one co-working focuses on cybersecurity and AI and things like that. So I think an intent to grow a community is one of the most important things when you start anywhere, is to say, I don't just want to do this one thing, this one band-aid about education, or this one thing without companies. I think the idea in any developing area is to form the intent of building that community and culture, and holistically looking at bringing all those pieces together, I think is an important factor in success, because most startups fail because it's tough to get all the pieces. It's tough to make sure you actually have something somebody wants. You test it, and even if you want it, it's tough to put it out there, and then it's tough to make it go. So the ideas are tough, and I get like to go on the last of one of David's points, which is this idea of pitch competitions. Obviously, we got our path into the success in one of our first companies because of a pitch competition. So been in a few of them, got some rewards, helpful. But there is an organization that does seed funding, and they stopped doing those pitch competitions because they found that the pitch competitions weren't an especially good indicator of whether these companies would be successful when they invested them. What they started doing instead was doing workshops where they would get these people and help them come up with their plan, their basic plan. And so they found a lot more about, oh, do these people have the resources? Do they have the plan? Can they get the marketing? And so as they helped develop their plans, that's when they decided to invest in them, because they found that there's really a lot you don't learn in a pitch competition. And they found it was much better to kind of narrow the field of who they want to work with and start working with no promise of any kind of funding at all. And then they started investing in those companies that not only had a great idea, but they felt comfortable, one, with the execution, and two, that they were willing to learn and take advice and adjust. Some people go in, oh, we've got it, this is it, that's all we're doing, and they realized that wasn't going to be successful. So I'll leave with that.
Mr. David Smith.
Eric, here once again, I feel like we could put our heads together and you and I could start a great company together based upon all of our shared knowledge and understand. Other things with the concept of a startup village, though, that Eric hit earlier, and I want to go back to, is you want to find relationships. You want to find mentors. You want to look at relationships in all the different areas you're going to work on. Here in Austin, Texas, we had a true visionary, Dr. George Kosmetsky, who helped transform Austin from a university state capital into really a fairly strong startup hub. And Eric, I don't know if you know this, George was very instrumental in San Diego as well in the early days there, and also up in parts of LA with the multimedia incubators and things. But one of his concepts that we've talked about before here, Sharif, is the concept of a technopolis, where what you do is you have the startup community, you have established corporations, you have the universities there, you have the governments there, the state and local governments. And all of those have to come together to support innovation and to support this type of thing that works. You know, a great example is when we brought the Semitech Consortia into Austin to help recover the semiconductor industry. All of those elements had to come together. There were not enough technicians in Austin for the semiconductor industry. The state and the local community colleges came together to address that need. We needed to expand the number of research scientists at the research universities. Well, commercial companies came together to endow professorships and chairs at the research universities to get that science effort into it. You begin to see the others as you look at that. As we see the startups that spun out of that, they were tremendous. The startups that spun out of some of the other Technopolis activities were tremendous. And those are the things that are necessary for you to grow a community. And the startup communities that you see referenced here, because the whole concept of a startup village is the community and the surrounding area coming together to help define how to embrace innovation, how to embrace entrepreneurship, how to put the resources in place that can do that, the business infrastructure, the social infrastructure, the educational infrastructure. Just like starting a new town, starting a new business, a new company is the same thing. Great ideas are fantastic, but you've got to put around them funding. You've got to put around them the human capital, the scientists, the engineers, the marketeers, all the leadership, all of that to do it. You need to look at the relationships. You need to look at something simple. One of the companies I've worked with in Greece and in Malta and in Geneva wanted to start up in the United States, bring their startup to the United States too. The hardest thing they had to do was set up a banking relationship, and to set up a banking relationship where they can exchange funds among all four countries. That seems pretty simple, but let me tell you, it's not for small companies. And so you see things like that. How can I move personnel between them? Because as Sharif, you know, I've said this before, the best way to transfer technology is using a moving van. It's moving people. And so if I'm a startup in multiple countries, which many startups have to be today, how can I move people around it? How can I protect my intellectual property and all of those? You know, on our last Friday sessions for the last month, we've talked about Nikola Tesla and how he was a brilliant person inventing, but his big failure was commercializing, taking things to market. How can I bridge that gap between being the visionary to being the person to invent, to being the person to protect my intellectual property, to being the person to start the company, to put the various infrastructure elements together, and then successfully take it and have people buy it and use it and then grow. Those are the things you have to do to really take care of a successful startup, and particularly in a startup village, because you have so many different things. And I have been in startup communities where the skills just do not match to each other's. We have another startup community here in Austin that has been moderately successful. But what they do is they're part real estate play, a large part real estate play, but they like to match successful entrepreneurs to them. Their requirements, though, is for them to match a successful entrepreneur to you, you have to give up part of your company. To be in their program, you have to give up part of your company to them, in addition to the rent and stuff you pay too. Now, yes, there's a lot of exposure, they have a lot of people coming through, but you have to balance that as a startup person. Do I want to give up equity very early in the company. And by the way, equity at the very early stage of a company is sometimes your very most expensive equity. In fact, it is your most expensive equity versus when you're in market and growing and stuff. And you need to think about that as founders. Is it something I can go find someone else to do without giving up equity? Can I exchange other things for it? Can I do others? Same way with office space. The co-working facilities that Eric talked about have many pluses for startups and many minuses too. Again, you have to be very protective there because you tend to often give away some of the things that you should hate odious trade secrets. In every startup, trade secrets have other intellectual property and things going forward, and human capital. Oftentimes, your developers, your UI specialists, all of those do not really understand intellectual property. And in some of the co-working facilities and others, because you're standing around there drinking coffee, having beer in the afternoon, it gets real easy to give trade secrets away too. So you have to again, understand the nuances and prepare the people for them. But there's just so many different models that having a trusted mentor, to having an advisory board, not necessarily a board of directors, but an advisory board during your startup is critical. Going out and understanding what is the voice of the customer. What do the customers really want? And circling that back into what you're trying to launch and what you're trying to do is very, very important. And this is going to sound funny. Most startups fail. The vast majority of startups fail. I've seen statistics that say 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 startups fail. One might succeed, 1 or 2 might be partially successful, but most startups fail because it's not real easy. And it really takes all these different things. And Sharif, programs like yours, where you bring on people like what you have today, where you get your groups together and meet with them one-on-one in the small groups like you post here do. These are critical to making startups and entrepreneurship and technopolis concepts and regional economic development concepts and everything succeed. You've got to really work across this group of people to be successful. So Sharif, that's my remarks here.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Eric for concluding remarks for today's session, and if you have advice for our entrepreneur, you can share.
Yeah, one of, I think, the big efforts that I appreciate the most is a knowledge by several organizations that getting government, industry, and academia working together is very valuable thing. And in San Diego, that's happened a lot. It's happened in the Blue Tech. It's happened with Connect. It's happened with Startup San Diego. So, often talking to the mayors and the city councils and the universities and lots of companies, and we have government too. So lots of talking to government and opening them up, because government needs technology too. And they also need to help with the rules and the connections in a friendly environment, and they can provide resources. Government sometimes has given them free data and things like that. So I think building that innovation-friendly environment in lots of areas is very helpful. The second thing is access to resources. Sometimes startups have trouble getting internet or a place to work. One of them, we started working, at coffee houses. That was our office for a lot of time until we moved into a co-working space and got access to other resources. And part of the resources that I think David has mentioned several times is legal. Fortunately, here, we've got lots of free legal advice at the basic stages. Some attorneys volunteer their time. We've got a nonprofit one that actually works out of a co-working space. So if you're there, there's somebody you can walk down the hall or set up an appointment with, and they will give you free legal advice right in a co-working places. Connect has office hours fairly regularly where you can sign up and talk to attorneys about things like IP. So things like places to work, internet, and then in those more technical areas, how do you get access to chips and technology and code and computer time? And fortunately, you bridge things with a supercomputing center and a big company like Qualcomm. So the resources, I think, are a real critical thing. And so now you've got a friendly environment, you've got resources that's starting. Now you need to make sure you have that education and training to give people what they need. And another part, of course, is the networking and collaboration with organizations like, in Hollywood, you talked about that. And then the other thing I think David talked about is access to funding and investments, access to money. And at all these phases, you have to worry about what you're giving up with your company. So, be very careful when you first start, because people want a lot of your company for a little bit. So he said, here's $25,000, give me 20% of your company. And we were fortunate in one of the first companies that we bootstrapped the whole way through. And one of our successes able to do that was by a lot of the people we worked with in the co-working place were either our customers or led us to customers that gave us enough basic work that we could just bring the money and survive to move up to the next level. So we grew to like 14 people, $1 million in revenue without giving away any of our company. So that's a very, very tough thing. The best thing you can do is say, oh, this has worked in 2 markets already. We just want the money to move into a 3rd market. That's cheap money. It's already proven to work in one place. You want to do the same thing. That's the best money to get to. So I guess my advice would be, if you're building one of these places, look holistically and focus on that environment first. Think about resources, education, networking, collaboration, funding and investment. If you're going to do a startup yourself, my biggest advice is don't think you do it yourself. A lot of people will give you free help. They'll meet with you. You call them and say, can I have 15 minutes? Can we do lunch? Can I talk to you about this? There's a lot of people that want to help. And there's a lot of organizations that will give you free resources. But as David said, be very careful what you're giving away, and make sure you talk to somebody that really understands. You're doing term sheets and you don't understand term sheets or things like that. Make sure you are working with somebody who really does, if that's on your advisory board or elsewhere.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. David Smith, what's your concluding remarks and what's your advice for entrepreneurs?
Well, a couple of things. I'm going to start with the old Nike commercial. Just go do it. If you have a good idea, you think people will buy it, you think there's a market need for it, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the world to begin at least the first steps. You can research a lot of it over the internet. You can look at resources at the different accelerators, incubators, all different types, startup villages, all different types of that to help get initial help. But take those first steps. See if you can find someone who's been out there before and has been successful, and talk to them. It's amazing how much information you can get. I can tell you, I've had people invite me out for coffee or invite me out for a margarita and go over their ideas. And, I tell some of them, you just got $10,000 worth of consulting for that cup of coffee. Go visit with people and that you trust. Have them sign a non-disclosure if you want to, and get started with it. Depending on if you want to be a sole founder, that's one approach. But most successful companies I've seen, the founders, there's usually 2 or 3 founders that work together. The concept, Sharif, we've talked about a lot in your programs, group intelligence. Group intelligence works in startups as well. Go do that. See how long you can bootstrap your startup. Either bootstrap it or use friend and family and full money, and use it. And as long as you can, do that before you go accept money from other investors, particularly from venture capitalists or ones like that, because even though venture capitalists are there giving you your money, their prime responsibility is to the people who gave them investment funds to get a return on. So even though they might give you money, they are not always your friend in building a successful company. So the longer you can bootstrap it, I would do that. Your best source of funds for a startup company is revenue. So the quicker you can begin to make money. I've advised several startups who we're building a product company, but they did consulting as part of the company until they could get their product ready so that the product can give them revenue. Once again, it's a way to not have to dilute your equity. And funding is a real part of any startup going forward. I want to reinforce things I said before. Find people to help you, find mentors, look at all the different sources for money. Do protect your intellectual property. Do understand there's classes of intellectual property. And some people focus too much on patents. What I tell most companies is if you're going to look at that approach, 60% or so of your intellectual property should be in trade secrets and not in patents. Because if you try to patent too much, the disclosures oftentimes give the results away. And there are large companies out there who will take your patents, if you're a small company, duplicate it and bring it to market because they might have 500 lawyers and you have none. And you don't have enough money to go through a patent battle to protect your property. And they have almost an inexhaustible set of lawyers there. So you just have to be smart. You have to be intelligent in how you protect your intellectual property. And I actually give the same advice to companies that are growing as well. You have to be very smart in how you protect your intellectual property. Group intelligence, group intelligence, group intelligence. It will help you go faster. The key, though, to a startup is get to that minimal viable product, the MVP, as quick as you can. Fail often, fail fast, though. It's better to get to market with having a couple of adjustments you have to go along the way than making sure everything's perfect and missing the market window. And spending a lot more money along the way, which is expensive money at that point. And finally, Sharif, use the resources. Use the network that you see at the World Talent Economic Forum. Use the network you see in these different groups we've talked about. Eric and I have both between us probably said 20, 25 different names today of organizations that can help you as well. And just reach out to folks. It takes a village. And particularly with startups, it takes a very diverse village to be successful. So Sharif, that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you. This is excellent discussion. Definitely, we need more of your support because we are engaging with millions of people in Asia Pacific, and definitely with your support, with your collaboration, we can uplift more communities and we can bring new business, new entrepreneur initiative, new market, and definitely it can be helpful for all of the people for the global communities. Thank you, Mr. Eric, for your excellent support for World Talent Economy Forum, and thank you, Professor David Smith, for all of your support. Hopefully, your continuous support to help us to take more action and take more initiative and make a successful venture for the global community. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.